right, hi, this is Ben, and I am going to try to make a few videos about my Ohio to Erie trail experience. I've never done videos before, and I guess I kind of want to because I have a reputation as a pretty horrid photographer, and I can only assume it extends to videography as well, and I would like to improve. And the only way you get better is by doing something. So I did feel like it was going to be super awkward to just sit and talk at the camera. So I thought I would kind of walk and talk. I milked cows for like 6 years, and I always liked when people would come in and talk with me as I worked. I like having something to do with my hands while I'm talking. So I guess I'm gonna kind of just walk through what I was thinking about and talk as I go. So I wanted to show our setup here. We're kind of a bicycling family. So we've got them hanging from the rafters and got them everywhere. There's us and 5 kids, so no shortage of bicycles and equipment in this family. And you can already tell I was being totally truthful about my horrid videography skills. So anyway, maybe I'll get a little bit less stilted here if I just start doing something. Why on earth did I even want to do the Ohio to Erie trail trip in the first place? It's 326 miles. It's not some people's idea of fun, I'm sure, but come on now. There we go. Well, for one thing, there, I don't know why this thing's fighting me so hard. I got like a pulley on it. Oh, because I'm off the pulley on this side. Okay. Anyway, see, neat stuff is cool until it doesn't work. See, I don't know if I can. Yeah, see, I'm out of the pulley. It doesn't work so well when it's like that. Here, I'm gonna pause for a second and fix that. Okay, we're back in business, and hopefully things roll a little bit more smoothly. I don't want this to be an omen of things to come on my trip, huh? Okay, so anyway, Ohio to Erie Trail, bike packing, backpacking, bike touring. Back in 2011, I was a young man interested in trying to do some backpacking. I had a very limited experience in the Boy Scouts. I stayed in scouting my whole life. I made it up to Eagle, and I'm proud of that. But I've only ever backpacked once. I got to go to Philmont, New Mexico, and if any of you are familiar with scouting, it's like the pinnacle of a lot of people's scouting career. It's a pretty awesome place. We did a 10-day trek, like real hardcore out there backpacking. And so living here in Ohio, I wasn't really sure where on earth I could go to get any kind of a backpacking experience. I didn't have the money or the equipment to do it on my own, and I didn't really know where to go. I didn't have money or the equipment to go anywhere far away and do it. And a lot of the equipment that I used when I went to Philmont was, like communal. It was provided by the group I went with, and I didn't really have proper backpacking stuff and didn't know a whole lot about it anyway. So I cooked up this idea. I really enjoyed riding rail trails, and I cooked up this idea that maybe I would ride the Richland B&O trail from Mansfield to Butler, and then I would bicycle over to Mohican and camp. And I thought it was a pretty great substitute for backpacking. It was something I was pretty comfortable with. I've ridden rail trails a lot, and it wound up being a bad idea for plenty of reasons. I'm gonna relocate the camera here and keep talking. All right, see, I'm really following through on this assurance that I am a terrible videographer. So I'm just gonna try to keep going here. I was gonna relocate the camera like into a static spot, but that is not working for me. So you have to bear with me holding this and doing like that whole shaky, what was that movie that everyone hated? It came out with like the shaky camera, like Cloverfield or something like that. It's like intent on giving everybody a seizure, right? Shaking the camera all around. I guess this is my best approximation of that movie. So anyway, yeah, before I get into like the details of my terrible trip, kind of what brought me to this, I wanted to address, I guess the whole reason I wanted to make videos, there's probably like some kind of ego to it to some degree, right? Like, oh, you know, everyone feels like whatever they have to say is important for other people to hear, and I am no exception to that, I'm sure. But beyond that, I did find like in the cycling community, there's a whole bunch of assumptions that people make about like what you know versus what you don't, and what you should know. And, you know, I came into this pretty green, and I still consider myself like in the middle. You know, there are people who can rattle off like the definition of cassette and chain ring and tell you all about the tire sizes and stuff. And a lot of that's still kind of intimidating to me. And I feel like I'm not alone in that. So I kind of wanted to make videos that went like from the ground up. So like, what is bike packing even? Because like, you know, in 2011, when I got this idea to go on my first overnight bike trip, I didn't even know bike packing was a word, much less a thing. I kind of thought I had stumbled on this like novel idea, right? To go off and camp from my bicycle. So some people call it bike packing, which is like a play on words from backpacking. It's just like it sounds, though, right? Instead of carrying everything in a frame pack on your back, you carry things on your bike, however you can handle doing that. For me, it was a point of practicality. I used a trailer because we already had one for my daughter, and you know, on flat rail trails, it was like no big thing to carry a trailer behind me. So I comically and erroneously assumed that it would be no big deal to carry a ton of stuff in my trailer for bike packing. So 2011 bike packing trip, I decide to load up, and I feel some shame now even recounting this. The level of, I guess, arrogance and ignorance that I had was pretty impressive. I brought, because it's what I had, a 6-person Coleman tent, a giant puffy all-weather sleeping bag, because I thought, well, you know, space isn't an issue. I got this trailer made for 2 little kids. When I went to Philmont, they told us that by the end of your trek, every ounce would feel like a pound. And I felt like that was a little bit of an embellishment, but I felt like it would definitely be overblown when it came to bike packing. All right, I'm gonna flip the camera around so you're not just looking at me while I'm talking, because I don't know, I feel like that's awkward for everybody. So anyway, yeah, I kind of thought that surely I could basically put as much weight in there as I needed. You know, whatever stuff I wanted to bring, I was gonna go ahead and bring. So in addition to the giant tent, because I already had it and it was paid for, I brought my giant sleeping bag, and the part that brings the most shame is I'm pretty sure I may have also included a queen-sized air mattress, because I was able to borrow it from my in-laws, and some firewood. Pretty sure I had firewood in there so I could cook. I'm not confident on that, but like I felt like as I was recounting this in my memory that there was pretty definitely firewood involved. So I had to have like, I don't know, 60 or 70 pounds in this trailer. And I did fine on the actual, you know, the trail part. That was no big deal. Things kind of started to fall apart after I got off trail. So I think it's like 7 miles from Butler over to Mohican Campground. And there are country roads that you can start out on, but at some point you almost have to hop onto Route 97. And I'm still not terribly familiar with the area, but I know enough to like have flashbacks. Route 97 is hilly as heck and also pretty heavily trafficked. Oh boy, if I thought I was awkward before, now I had to borrow my wife's camera holder that she uses for work to set up what kind of felt like I was staging like one of those hostage videos or like a confessional video or something. But I'm gonna try to get more comfortable with this. I thought that this video in its entirety, like I made little notes for myself. I thought I was gonna land at like 10 minutes. When I practiced what I wanted to cover, it was 10 minutes. And I'm pretty sure when I stitched together the videos I did prior with this one, I'm gonna land at way, way more than that. So hopefully from here on, it's gonna be more of an extemporaneous nature. I guess I wanted to do one more video after this, like before my ride, going over my equipment, sort of what I have, why I have it, what I've discovered I liked changing, necessities versus nice to have. Like I do have a little bit of experience, I feel like now with this. So, and again, I wanted to approach this from the perspective of someone who appreciates what it's like to go in knowing nothing. So when I got into this idea of bike packing, not even knowing that's what it was called, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm by no means an expert, but I am trying to approach this to hopefully lend a little bit of value to people who haven't done this before, or maybe feel a little bit intimidated by the prospect, because it's still kind of intimidating to me. And the only thing probably worse than my video skills are my editorial skills. So this is going to be a whole new venture for me too, trying to learn how to edit these things. So forgive me, and I can only hope there's only one way to go from here, and it's up. So I am going to reference my notes. So I'm pretty sure I covered sort of like the provenance of my bike packing journey. I was mentioning how ridiculously comically heavy my load was on my very first bike packing trip. The philosophy that we had in Boy Scouts was bring everything and the kitchen sink, you know, just in case. And that worked really well with the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. And that was what was ingrained in me throughout my scouting career. It's served me well in other avenues in life, but when you're doing something like a bike packing trip, less is more sometimes. So I took this ridiculous load in a trailer, a two-wheel trailer for kids. I also towed it behind my Trek 820 mountain bike with big knobby tires, because why not? It worked for me otherwise up to that point. And it was 2011, so at that point I also had a flip phone and printed off directions that probably came from MapQuest. I did want to defend myself a little bit. You know, I said I had like an air mattress and a big tent and a big cushy sleeping bag. I'm not just a camping sissy. Like, you know, like I said, I made it all the way up to Eagle. I definitely did do my Philmont trek. I took the Wilderness Survival Badge and, you know, stayed overnight in a shelter I built out of like branches and things. But, you know, I was just a complete moron, and I thought that weight wouldn't matter in a bike trailer, so why not be comfy? So I got a false sense of security from how well I did on the rail trail, and I don't remember exactly where I threw in the towel, but somewhere on Route 97, I called my now wife and said, you know, I tapped out. I was like, I cried uncle. I said, there's no way I'm going to be able to make it back the next day. Now, I don't know, one of the things I want to cover in some of these videos here, or like as I talk throughout my journey, there's all this terminology that bicyclists throw around. And this is probably not exclusive to cycling. Like every hobby has their hardcore contingent, and these people have some jargon that's, you know, special to them. Bonking. I've heard this one before and had to actually look up what it was. Bonking is apparently like when you just totally run out of gas and you've got nothing left to give. And I mean, it can go all the way up to like nausea, passing out even. I don't know if I've ever bonked necessarily, but if I did, this trip was probably the closest I came to it. So I called my wife and said, please come save me. And she was gracious enough to spend the night with me in the tent. She drove all the way out to me. stayed the night with me, and then we had the drive of shame back to my SUV. There's a quote that I like. Experience is a hard teacher. She gives the test first and the lesson after. I will say that that trip provided me valuable schooling. I learned, for one thing, that there's a big difference between backpacking and camping. So up to that point, this idea that I had that I was a camper because I was an Eagle Scout and I had done, I did the Klondike. I camped in the winter. I think it's like 5 nights that you have to do between like November and March. I did that a number of times. All these experiences that I had had throughout Boy Scouts led me to believe that I was a fully equipped camper. Backpacking and camping are not the same, and I think that definitely extends to bike packing. Bike packing is much more like backpacking. I think you do have the ability to bring a little bit more creature comfort when you're bike packing, and generally you're going to be within reach of amenities or towns. So in my opinion, it's a little bit of a cushier way to go than backpacking, but it is not camping, and I think it's important to make that distinction. It should not be confused with camping. It's not going to be the same. Also, I learned that there's a difference between weightlifting and conditioning. You can move around big heavy weights and progress and grow. That's not going to serve you the same way as conditioning specifically for cycling. That's a cardio and a strength thing combined. And I was ignorant. So let's see. In the dark ages of that dumpster fire in 2011, I didn't know what bikepacking was. There may have been online communities, but if there were, I didn't know anything of them. There's a lot more resources available now. And even so, I didn't give up. The very next year, my wife and I took a trip together, and it went better. It had definitely its own set of challenges, but I feel like every time we went out, we've learned something. And I think if that's the attitude that you approach it with, not just with bikepacking, but just in general, anything that you do in life, if you approach it with the attitude that there's something that can be learned here, you're going to be better off for it. There's another saying that I like. It's, you are the sum of all of your experiences. And I try to remind myself of that, especially like when I get in sort of those, those more discouraged mentalities where you feel like nothing's going right or you feel like you're failing at what you're doing. As long as you remind yourself that the sum total of everything that you do informs who you are as a person, then there's definitely value to be had even from failures, as long as you're learning and paying attention to things to learn from. So my wife went with me in 2012. Maybe she thought she could save me from my pitfalls. But we still probably brought too much weight. We used the same 2-child trailer for our stuff. We used the same 6-person tent because that's what we had. She was on a Walmart mountain bike. I was still on my Trek mountain bike. Neither of us had lights. We didn't worry about helmets. So, we've had an evolution. Back then, I didn't really care about the helmets. I had a little kid, and I wasn't really thinking, I think, necessarily about her. I was more just thinking about, I never rode with a helmet before, why do I need one? People used to give me grief when I was skiing and say, you need to wear a helmet. And I said, the ship has sailed, the brain damage has been done, jokingly. But now as I've gotten older and I think matured, I realized that I need to try to be safe and be there for my kids, and I need to be a good example for them. It's really hypocritical if I make them wear a helmet and I don't. So, a rear flashing light to make myself more visible in cars, a helmet, those are 2 critical pieces of equipment that I think any cyclist needs to invest in before they set off on a road. The trail needs a helmet too, but the road, you definitely need a rear flashing light for visibility. Our immersion in this hobby has grown. We have gone from, my wife and I in one little trailer to now we have a utility trailer that I try to outfit with a configuration where I can put 7 of our bikes in. It's us and 5 kids. So We are able to take 7 people out bicycling now. They don't really make racks for that. We've done the Great Allegheny Passage 3 times now. Twice we've completed it with kids and once on our own. Every year, I believe since 2012, we've done an overnight trip together, even adding children along the way. My wife has gone on these trips, slightly pregnant, more pregnant. We've taken a baby by necessity on one, and obviously like with proper safety equipment, but we've definitely made this a family experience, and I'm glad we've been able to. So circling back to my Ohio to Erie trip specifically though, why do I even want to do this? I noted here that I had to hold myself back on my list of reasons. Amazingly, this is the condensed version. For one thing, to me, bicycling makes the world feel bigger and it makes it feel smaller. And what I mean by that is, as a child, you go out and you bicycle and all of a sudden it's like the world is opened up to you. It makes your reach that much greater. So where you were confined to your house or maybe the couple places that you went locally, now you can go and you can see more. I got to bicycle, I was allowed to bicycle to a friend's house in a town 8 miles away. And to me, that was a huge deal. That was a level of freedom I was never gonna be able to experience without a license, I thought. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing it by my own locomotion. At the same time, making the world feel smaller. We live in a really rural area right now, my wife and I, and at times you can feel kind of remote and desolate, but I can bicycle to a number of towns, and all of a sudden it really makes the world feel smaller to me. I don't feel so remote and disconnected when I think about how many places I can get to without even having to have a car. So I love that. So why else do I want to do it? I'm testing my mettle. I want to see what I've got in me and if I can accomplish this. And I like the accountability that this challenge brings. As I mentioned conditioning before, you can't just go into this cold and just wake up one day and say, I'm going to go bicycle 326 miles. Even if you stretch it out into 2 weeks, which most of us don't have the luxury of doing, you're still going to have to prepare, and I like that. There's no substitute for the work, and when you're done, you see the fruit of that labor. I'm not a foamer, which is a not particularly endearing term for rail fanatics, but I love trains, and it's great for me because a lot of the rail trails follow along paths that are train adjacent, nearby trains. And as the name implies, rail to trails, you're traveling on old rail lines. And I love that perspective and that view. It's interesting to me, as someone who also likes history, to consider what the world was like back when these rail lines still existed and still had passenger service. I love seeing what you would have seen from the window of a train, and it's a very unique view that you're not going to get from a car. The exercise gets you out of your head, at least in my case, and I think a lot of people share that. And it's also exercise that doesn't feel like exercise, which I think to many of us is like the best kind. I also feel kind of like, I'm not going to get like hyper into this, but kind of like nature is my church. I just feel very connected, I guess, spiritually and to the world at large when I'm out enjoying creation. And one of the kids have a poo book, and he says at some point in the book that he likes to think about the bigness of things and the smallness of things. And that's definitely how I feel when I'm out on trails. Rides lend themselves to contemplation, at least for me, and I get solitude, but not loneliness. You're never lonely on a trail because it's never too far until you come across another person or a little town or something. So it's kind of, to me, the best of both worlds. You get a little bit of alone time, but not like sad alone time. I don't know who came up with the idea, but there's this concept where there are 3 types of fun. Type 1, 2, and 3 fun. Type 1 fun is like just enjoyment. It's like going to an amusement park or sitting at the beach or going to a restaurant. It's just fun. It asks nothing of you, basically. Type 2 fun is fun that's not necessarily fun in the moment, but you have a great story afterwards. You look back on it fondly. It's like adventure fun. I like cycling because it gives me a healthy dose of type 2 fun. Something goes wrong and you have to think on your feet and work through the problem, and eventually you have a great story for it. And it's something I try to remind my kids on rides. You know, if a chain pops off, or if the sky opens up, or if we get muddy, that's type 2 fun. So when you're feeling like you want to just curse it out, remind yourself that afterwards you're going to appreciate this experience. Type 3 fun is fun that was never fun at all, and you don't look back on fondly and kind of wish you hadn't done it. I'm going to say that my first overnight trip, that Mohican disaster I had, really bordered 2 to 3. I appreciate the insights I was able to gain from it, but I'd like to never ever do that again. Why else do I like cycling? Well, I feel like I get to earn my rest. I'm not a very sedentary person by nature. I don't like sitting and doing nothing, but I am still a person, and I do like sitting and doing nothing. I just like doing it after I feel like I've worn myself out a little bit, and I don't feel a twinge of guilt when I sit on a porch and just loaf after I put on a bunch of miles. I like the family-friendly atmosphere of trails. You know, I mentioned earlier that when you're cycling along, you'll sooner or later run into other people. And to me, it seems like without fail, they're good people, you know. They give you the head nod, or they say hello, or some of them even sincerely say like, have a nice day. And it's a type of community I don't think you necessarily get in many hobbies. The kids love it. It feels like a family of sorts, and it's just some place that I've really grown to feel very comfortable. Trails in particular just are way better than roads. Roads are hilly, roads are scary. I'm always worried a car is gonna try to come up and murder me. You know, when I'm on the road, I'm looking in my mirror just almost obsessively because I'm worried about a car coming up from behind. And I was like, pick this point mentally of, okay, if they haven't started to move over by this landmark, this tree or fence post or whatever, I'm going in the ditch. And I hate that I even have to consider that. And I can't really get in the zone and get out of my head when I'm worried. I'm familiar with trails, as I said before, and I think part of that is like the way that we've grown up. My wife and I, and our family has grown up with trails and through trails. It's been a common experience for us to have to pull off and, okay, my wife has to feed the baby, or as they've gotten a little bit older, go look for a place to find hot water, to heat up a bottle. I mean, we've made picnic lunches, and we've made sure to plan trips centered around let's find a playground so that they can get out and stretch their little legs. And we've eaten under a number of pavilions and used a number of wonderfully, graciously, publicly provided bathrooms, and the kids have done it too. I mean, we've taken like gas station GI baths where you're just scrubbing yourself down because you got all muddy, and it's become very familiar. I was actually thinking about it the other day. We went down to a trail in Holmes County, and we were sitting there eating our lunch under the pavilion, and the kids ran around and they were playing a little bit, and I thought just how at ease I feel there because we've spent so much time alongside trails. And why else do I want to do it? Just because I love the trails, which I imagine you probably inferred from some of what I've been saying, but I love them and I want to spend time on them, and I want to grow my familiarity with the Ohio To Erie Trail Network. Now, I'm not like Ohio's biggest cheerleader, but I was born here and I do love the state, and I feel like we are blessed with an awesome trail system, and I'd like to know it better. I want to be able to be an advocate for our state's robust trail system. I guess I've looked at another one of my little notes here. My wife and I, we even got married at a pavilion alongside a trail that we had passed through when we were taking an overnight trip and thought was, a lovely setting. And we built our house alongside an abandoned railbed that we have hopes will someday be a completed trail. We're really kind of all in on this. Nevertheless, I have concerns. So, Ben, what are my concerns? Well, where do I start? Intimidation. Intimidation is absolutely my biggest, broadest concern. Even though information on bike touring has grown exponentially, and I even think the activity has too, there is a big divide between casual riders, people who go out a couple of times on the weekend throughout the year, and people who can rattle off, definitions of bike components that I still can't. I think that I'm in the middle. Like, I had to Google how to say panniers, and I think I've heard other pronunciations, but I Googled it and it told me it's French and it's panniers. I had to look up what credit card touring was. I'd heard people refer to it and I didn't know. And for those of you who also don't know, credit card touring is taking bike touring trips but using your credit card instead of a tent. You're just using it to pay for like a room at a hotel or an Airbnb or something. And there are more terms that I have learned and become more familiar with, but there's definitely still this factor of intimidation. There's sags and saddles, which for years I called a seat, and sometimes I still do. And there's centuries, and sometimes it just feels like everyone who tours automatically knows all of these things. I'm better versed now than I was a decade ago, but I'm still painfully aware of everything that I don't know. I cannot hang with the hardcore bike shop pros when they start talking, all the jargon. And to the world's relief, you'll never see me in spandex. So, there's a line of where I am as far as like how hardcore I am, and spandex is always, I think, going to be just outside of my line. I'm semi-handy mechanically, but I've still never changed a tube myself, like on the side of a trail. I've had to do it. I took a maintenance class to learn, and I did it once in the class, or twice in the class, and it went well enough. I've done it once on a kid's bike in my garage with access to all my tools, but as far as on the side of the trail, there's absolutely a sense of intimidation there. I read about some guy's trip here on one of the Facebook groups that I follow. He had 4 flats in a row because a little piece of metal got inside of his tire, and he didn't get it fished out. I don't even carry 4 tubes. I literally do not know what I would do in that situation. So I'm worried about that. And it'd be super if I just never have to change a tube. But the only way I'm going to learn is by doing it. So at some point, I'm going to have that experience. Even just learning the difference between the Ohio To Erie Trail and the Ohio and Erie Canalway was tough, because people kept referring to both of them, and it was super confusing because there's a segment of it that overlaps. So that's something else that I had to come to learn, and I felt like a dummy, and I kind of felt almost like an imposter or a poser, and thought, maybe I'm not as much a part of this community as I think when I don't know these things, and other people are talking about it like it's common knowledge. I do understand it now a little bit better, the composition of the Ohio To Erie Trail. It's actually like 22 regional or local trails all melded together to make one all-encompassing trail. So it would almost be like if you're on the interstate and each section through a county gets its own unique name, but the interstate as a whole still also has one overarching name. I'm also very worried about road sections. My failure of a trip had 7 whole miles on the road. My second day, the way that I've plotted out my trip, I'm looking at 28 miles just to get from my house down to Fredericksburg. And then I've got another section later in the day to get from Kilbuck to Glenmont, I think it is. That section looks to be a little bit flatter, but the Amish country, there's no way around it. It's hilly. I grew up just outside Orville, and I thought I was pretty comfortable with hills. Now I live outside Doylestown, and I mean, like, we have hills. And I've tried training on them. I'm doing my best to keep up with training on them, but I still don't necessarily feel like, okay, on my second day with a full load of gear, how proficient am I going to be at climbing every hill? And this is just my own personal benchmark of success, and I know that it's not actually indicative of failure, but if I have to get off and walk, it's going to feel like a little bit of a failure. Like, I want to believe that I've prepped well enough that I can handle every hill from my saddle or seat. And I guess we'll find out. I'm nervous about wayfinding, detours, and missing trail connections. I mean, when you read on these Facebook groups, which is a great way to glean information, I think, firsthand information from people, and people who ask questions that you might have also, you hear these common refrains. And my wife and I, we did a section starting north of Columbus, stayed overnight in downtown, and then ended south of Columbus one year. And the wayfinding was no joke. I mean, there was one section, I think it was around like the Camp Chase Trail, where I took off down a little side street that I thought was the right way, and I must have looked very confident because another cyclist followed me, and that poor guy had to turn around in the same church parking lot I did when I figured out that I was not on the right path. And I guess maybe I'm a little bit of a leader because I did it along the Great Allegheny Passage too. My wife and I took a whole group of senior riders that we didn't know down a dead end somewhere around McKeesport, because it definitely looked like we were on the right path. And embarrassingly, like, that wasn't our first time doing that section. And I don't know, I lost my way. So, I mean, that is something that I'm nervous about. The detours right now, there are a number of active detours on the Ohio To Erie Trail, and it seems like they're forever changing. This is one thing that kind of disappoints me with Ohio's trail system. The Great Allegheny Passage, and I understand that it's unique in that it's like virtually 100% on trail, and they had an infrastructure in place, alongside the river that we don't have throughout our entire stretch. And Ohio's trail system runs through some more developed areas than the Great Allegheny Passage does. But I feel that they value, that they consider the tourist value of their trail system and try really hard not to inconvenience anybody or put an impediment on the trail. Ohio always has sections under construction, and make the jokes you want, like, because those of us who live here, grew up here, we know that the highway system is just the same. Something's always under construction. But with the trail system, I don't feel like there's necessarily one governing body who tries to make sure that there are good cycle appropriate detours. And maybe there aren't. Maybe trying to provide them isn't really feasible. But it's hard not to think that there couldn't be more of an effort. And some of the detours, you hear people commenting on them, or like you read their question and answer threads, and they look and sound rough. Hilly, fast roads with no shoulder, ticking off a ton of cars. I'm not really looking forward to dealing with that. And every active closure is outside of my home area. I'm well versed with my little corner of the world, but I'm gonna get into some areas that I'm not going to know well. And the wayfinding and the detours, those are scary to me. So that's about it. Everyone who was brave, foolish, or bored enough to watch this thing in its entirety, welcome aboard, and let's go get this trail.